1968 was a tumultuous year in American history, the culmination of a decade that seemed to be spiraling out of control. Counterculture movements emerged in resistance to traditional norms and authority. The nation was becoming increasingly divided over social issues, and clashes with police and violence in the streets seemed to be occurring with increasing frequency. In April of 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, sparking riots. But perhaps the most concerning issue on the minds of Americans in 1968 was the conflict in Vietnam, which had been escalating for years. President Lyndon Baines Johnson, or LBJ, had continually assured the American people that the North Vietnamese were weakening, that victory was at hand, and that the war would soon be over. But in January of '68, the North Vietnamese launched the Tet Offensive, which demonstrated that this was simply not true. In June, just 2 months after MLK's death, another assassination occurred. The brother of JFK, Bobby Kennedy, was killed. Earlier in 1968, Bobby Kennedy had declared he would seek the Democratic presidential nomination, campaigning on a clear anti-war platform against the incumbent LBJ. But then, not long after this announcement, LBJ announced he would not run again, which made Kennedy a frontrunner for the nomination, along with another anti-war candidate, Minnesota Senator Eugene McCarthy. Then, on April 29th, LBJ's vice president, Hubert Humphrey, announced that he would also seek the nomination. Humphrey was too late to enter any of the state primaries, but this didn't really matter because at this point in time, the party bosses had the final say on who would be nominated. After Bobby Kennedy was killed in June, this left Eugene McCarthy as the anti-war candidate and Humphrey as the pro-war establishment candidate. When the Democratic National Convention was held in Chicago in August, thousands of anti-war protesters gathered outside the convention hall. Clashes between protesters and police soon turned violent. Inside the convention hall, the party bosses chose Hubert Humphrey as the presidential candidate, despite the fact that he had won no state primaries. Democratic voters felt betrayed, and these events tarnished Humphrey's image in the general election in November. Meanwhile, the Republican candidate, Richard Nixon, was making a political comeback after 2 defeats in the early 1960s. He was able to secure the Republican nomination largely by employing his famous Southern strategy, as it came to be known. This strategy was predicated on the idea that the region of the South was the key to winning the election. It used coded language like states' rights to signal to Southerners that Nixon would oppose efforts to implement civil rights in the South. In fact, Nixon privately met with Southern leaders to make these assurances, securing the support of influential South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond, for example, who had switched to the Republican Party prior to this. He was influential in helping Nixon win the nomination by securing votes from Southern state delegates. Once Nixon won the Republican nomination, he would use this same Southern strategy to appeal to voters in the South in the general election.